Hey, I want to take a few minutes to talk about the modern science of salesperson selection. Here's the deal. Many of us hire salespeople just by throwing out an ad, interviewing a few people, seeing if anyone's had sales success before, seeing if they're outgoing, seeing if they seem normal, really, and then taking a chance on them. But the outcome of that is usually high turnover. Either they quit, you lose them, or they get fired because they don't perform. And for many companies, the sales role is just this revolving door, and it's one of the biggest pain in the butts to continuously hire and train salespeople over and over again. So here's the deal. There's been about 40 years of research by a few different groups into this, and there's a super simple way to make sure you hire a salesperson who can and will sell for you. So I want to break down the modern science of salesperson selection. So at the end of this thing, you'll know exactly how you can choose someone who is just going to be an absolute rock star for you. So let's jump into it. So for 40 years, more than 40 years, companies have been really trying to dig in and find a way to hire salespeople who are going to actually succeed, right? This is no secret. Well, in '64, Harvard Business Review published a document titled "What Makes a Good Salesman?" And this was kind of the first kind of dipping the toe in the water of this type of research. A gentleman by the name of Herbert M. Greenberg and David Mayer wrote this article. Now, this was based on a 4-year study of salespeople. And what they were looking for is, hey, out of top salespeople, what are some of the commonalities? What do they have in common? And at the end of this 4 years, they found two things in common: empathy and ego drive. So let's hit those real quick. Empathy, the ability to sense the reactions of other people, notice their subtle cues and clues. Having empathy allows good salespeople to understand and relate to what the company wants. Ego drive, this is the need to have a prospect or customer say yes, they wanted to win. What great salespeople seek is the opportunity to turn others around to their point of view. They're influencers. So Harvard Business Review, these two gentlemen found these two things in common with salespeople. And this was the beginning of the modern science of salesperson selection. So in 1990, a gentleman by the name of Dave Curlin, who founded a company named OMG, Objective Management Group, he also objective 4 years of study researching really the same thing. What makes up a great salesperson who's going to be successful? And Dave and his team discovered 11 elements that contributed to sales failure. Not success, but failure. So while it was true, the thing that the Harvard Business Review study proved that good salespeople did have empathy and ego drive, he found that there's also a lot of bad salespeople that had just as much empathy and ego drive. So it just wasn't enough. So OMG took the opposite approach when they started to look at salespeople. Instead of looking at, hey, what do the great ones have in common? And that's a technique known as benchmarking. They started to look at, hey, what are the issues? What are the characteristics that if somebody has this or this way of thinking about something, that's going to lead to failure. So while Harvard looked at the two things that really were commonalities for every successful salesperson, Dave and his team said, yeah, but you know what? Just as many unsuccessful also have those characteristics, so we can't pick salespeople based on those. So he jumped in and he found 11 different elements that led to failure in sales. Now, there were 4 elements that were absolutely crucial to success that Dave and his team at OMG found. So let's go through those 4 elements that are absolutely crucial to success. The first one's desire. That's how badly a salesperson wants to succeed. Now, if a salesperson lacks this strong sense of desire, their incentive to do anything is going to be pretty low, and they're going to always take the easy way out and not be very good salespeople. Number 2, commitment. Strong commitment is really the commitment to carry through the good and bad, right? So this kind of ties into desire. So OMG found that a lot of salespeople had conditional commitment. So that meant, hey, I'll do whatever it takes. I've got a desire to succeed, but if it gets too difficult, too scary, then I'm out, right? So you got to have desire, and you've got to have a commitment to see that desire through. Now, there's some updates to this in 2008. With the economic crisis. I'll get to those in a second, but so far just hold on to these: desire and commitment. The third one was outlook. So successful salespeople had a great outlook. Outlook encompasses just your attitude about everything. your career, your job, the company you work for, yourself, the economy, everything around you. If your outlook is not as strong as it could be, then candidates were often looking for new positions. The grass is always greener, right? They were always looking for something different, something new, not fully committed. And then there was responsibility. So here's how responsibility goes. When salespeople take responsibilities for their results or their lack of results, that means they actually have the power to change. So if a salesperson is not succeeding and because they have a bad outlook, because they're complaining about their product or service or their price is too high or whatever it is, if they're not blaming themselves, they can't improve. A salesperson can only improve when they self-reflect and say, hey, I've got to get better. Let's look at what worked and what didn't work. Let's try to up our game and improve. If you're blaming something else, you never have that conversation with yourself of what can I do better, because it's not your fault. So when the combination of the strong desire and commitment are present, accompanied by the other two things, the outlook a salesperson has, they have a tremendous incentive to change. So this incentive to change, we call it as somebody who's trainable. So as we assess salespeople, we want to see if they have some key traits that are just essential for sales, but we also want to see, hey, how trainable is this person? If they're not complete, how trainable are they? How easily will they adopt the technical aspects of our service or other sales training? So while identifying tons and tons of weaknesses that could hinder sales performance, there's really just 5 that OMG discovered that when present, especially in certain combinations, not by themselves, not all together, but in certain combinations, prevent salespeople from executing their sales plans, basically following a sales process and being successful. So 5 key weaknesses, and when some of these are stacked up in certain combinations, it's almost highly likely they're going to be unsuccessful. So the 5 of these weaknesses that you always want to assess salespeople for are the need to be liked, the tendency to become emotional, self-limiting beliefs, non-supportive buy cycle, which is a bad kind of empathy. I'll explain that in a second, and discomfort with issues involving money, really discussing money above a certain threshold. So let's look into those 5, okay? But real quick, an update. I told you that there's been an update since 2008. There was a new discovery just since then. After 2008, what we started to see is the successful salespeople up until that economic crash. After the crash, some of them continued to be successful and some absolutely tanked. So there was something we were missing. We were able to predict good sales results up to 2008, but what was that missing piece after 2008? Why did some of those good salespeople just fall off? Why did their results fall off? And we found that the single biggest difference between those who thrived afterwards and those who kind of fell to the bottom of the rankings were their tolerance for rejection. You see, there's a lot more rejection after 2008. And we found that difficulty recovering from rejection was actually just as important as those 5 other weaknesses I just mentioned. So again, when OMG combined incentive to change with the number of weaknesses uncovered, they were able to start to accurately predict growth potential, how good someone is now and how much they could grow. So you're probably starting to put this picture together in your head right now of, all right, we got from Harvard the first 2 things that all successful salespeople have, and now we've got these 4 things that absolutely predict success, right? And then and potential growth. And then, okay, now we've got 5 and now actually 6 since 2008 of these weaknesses that when they have these weaknesses, especially in certain combinations, these salespeople are going to fail. So, hey, guys, now we're putting together really what is the formula? What are the ingredients of a successful salesperson? So you're probably putting this all together. Now, when Dave and his crew discovered this, there's the 5 major weaknesses. There's a really cool article published in '94 in Inc. magazine about these 5 weaknesses called Psyched Up or Psyched Out. Really cool article. If you get a chance, look it up and read it. You can still find it today. So anyways, since then, OMG, Objective Management Group, they kept on researching and really brought their test to market as one of the first sales-specific tools. Now, there's a lot of personality tests and profiles and things like that out there. Everything I've talked about, ask yourself this. Does DISC or Colby or any of those, which are absolutely fantastic when we're talking about personality and who's going to get along with who and what are the communication styles. But do they do anything at all to test for any of those things that we know make a good salesperson, or any of those 5, now 6 weaknesses that we know are going to really keep a salesperson from ever being able to perform? And the answer is obvious there. So OMG has been at this for a while, and really just been upping their game year after year with additional research. So let's keep going into some more of this research. One of the things they found is that even when we look at all of these different traits and characteristics, depending on the type of job you have, you need more or less of them, right? So for instance, there's not just one benchmark that, hey, if you're above this benchmark, you're a good salesperson. It depends on the job you have. Think about it. If your job is selling 7-figure solutions to CEOs, or your job is selling shelf space at the local supermarket, 2 very different jobs. So you need different levels of the strengths and different levels of the weaknesses, right? So we went even further. OMG went even further to find out, okay, in different sales roles, we've got to dial this in even more. And they started research on what makes people successful in different roles and combining this with everything they've learned to date. Okay? Mindless Selling, published in 2001, used case histories to illustrate all this research that we just talked about. At the same time, remember Herb from Harvard, him and his team, they kept researching all this time. And they added 3 additional dimensions for those sets of criteria of success. Remember, they started with 2, but he added 3 more. And go figure, they're the exact same ones that Curlin and his group found. They called them something different, but they were the same. So service motivation. One of the weaknesses, need for approval. We'll get more into that in a second. I know I tabled that for a moment, but need for approval. So what need for approval is, or service motivation, is need for approval is getting your emotional needs met by your prospect. The way that Herb kind of described it was they were very successful at earning the respect of their clients. They wanted to hear yes. They wanted to be liked. They wanted approval of their clients. So service motivation. So we also started to look at service motivation as an indicator of failure or success. You wanted some of it, but not too much of it. Too much of it meant you would give the client whatever price they wanted. You wanted to make them happy, so you do what they wanted, and that wasn't consistent with top salespeople. Conscientiousness, similar to responsibility. Whether externally or internally driven, responsibility and the desire to carry out tasks. Responsibility, purposefulness, organization, foundations of goal setting. Again, responsibility and conscientiousness tie in together. Really, it's hey, if I'm blaming someone else, I can't improve. If I blame myself, now I've got a recipe where I can start to find out what I did wrong and improve. And then we had ego strength, right? Remember in 2008 what Dave found out? The way rejection is handled also plays a big part of this. So it was just really cool the way that Herb started this over 40 years ago. Probably close to 60 years ago now. Started this research. Then later on, OMG started the research. And then they kind of ended up at the same place by continuing to research, kind of validating each other's research, right? So it was a pretty cool thing. Now, by 2002, OMG's research showed that there were important company-specific requirements for success that the candidate had to meet to succeed. So again, they're just dialing it in, dialing it on, dialing it in. Now, what was commonly used was benchmarking. We talked about that a moment ago. Now, that would routinely overlook the requirements top-performing salespeople were failing to meet, right? So what this meant was this. Few companies had identified the requirements for new salespeople, and when they did, they usually didn't look any further than their normal pool of candidates. What OMG did is they began to look at various weaknesses and identified to learn whether candidates would be able to execute the various requirements. So let me translate that for you. Remember how we were talking about different roles require different skill sets or different levels of strengths and less weaknesses? Well, this took that even another step further and said, hey, within those roles, there's different functions you're going to have to provide, right? Like, are you looking for new business and prospecting? Are you doing X, Y, or Z? And if you're going to be in this specific role, you need a specific skill set for that role. So now we're really dialing it into the modern science of salesperson selection, where it's here, from a macro perspective, here's what makes great salespeople. Here's what makes salespeople fail. Then you take, okay, here's all those ones that pass, kind of the test, who we think will be successful. Then we start throwing more tests at them. Okay, will they be successful in the role? And now we're at this stage, it's, okay, they can be successful in that role, but with these specific job requirements, do they have what it takes to meet those? Do you guys see how we're just really, really drilling into what makes a successful salesperson? So those job-specific criteria have to do with closing, hunting, competition, price shoppers, and money tolerance. I'm going to take 1 second to go through those. Closing. A company with a short sales cycle or one-call close must have salespeople who have performed in that environment previously and whose buy cycle show that they don't think it over before making a purchase. This was non-supportive buy cycle. Remember, I told you we'd come back to that. They have to buy the way they sell, or else they're going to have a tough time closing. Hunting. A company that requires a new salesperson to go out and find new opportunities must select salespeople who have performed in that role previously and don't have call reluctance. Call reluctance is you're not going to go out there and consistently prospect if you need approval. Remember that need for approval we talked about? That was next. So if you want your customers to like you, you're going to be reluctant to cold call because most cold calls end in rejection, right? So competition. A company that faces much of the same competition everywhere they go must select a salesperson who has sold in a competitive environment before, and again, whose buy cycle shows that they don't comparison shop when making a purchase. This goes back again to non-supportive buy cycles. So now you're probably seeing, oh, now I get how those 5 or 6 key weaknesses prevent a salesperson from actually performing. Price shoppers. A company that sells at a higher price than its competition must select a salesperson who has sold in a similar price-sensitive environment before, and again, whose buy cycle shows they don't price shop. Money tolerance. A company that sells a high-priced 5-figure or more solution must select a salesperson who has sold in a similar environment before and whose buy cycle shows they don't think of a relatively small amount of money is a lot, right? They don't get tongue-tied when talking about big numbers. So, wow, we're really dialing it in now. By 2004, another researcher was added to the mix, Tom Schaff. Now, Tom showed that most of the recommended candidates, through all this testing we've talked about so far, failed in a technical sales position. So why did they fail? What was that commonality? What was this problem with the testing? Well, these people, these supposedly great salespeople who failed in technical roles, they had a fatal combination of not being money motivated and they did not enjoy selling. So now we know, we've got to test how people are motivated and whether or not they actually like what they're doing, right? Now OMG identified these during their research earlier, the 20 or so, the couple dozen weaknesses that they found, but they never knew it had this big of an impact, right? So now we know, and we know in order to predict sales success, we've got to look at these factors as well. Later in 2004, more research suggested that 3 additional company-specific hire criteria must be utilized to really predict well. Top exclusive, when a company needs a salespeople to call on a top decision maker, like a CEO of a large company. Resistance, when a product or service is often met with resistance, a company must select a salesperson who has experience handling a lot of resistance, right? Some salespeople might have a score that makes them really effective, but then they're still going to fail to perform because maybe their managers aren't holding them accountable, they don't closely supervise their activities. Once they feel this resistance, they take the path of least resistance and they stop being effective salespeople. So now we're looking at how they're motivated and how they need to be managed. So we've got to measure for that too. So if you're keeping tally, there's a lot of stuff we've actually got to measure in order to have a successful salesperson. We got to know what kind of environment they're in, what they're selling, who they are, what their DNA is. Again, I'm going to tie this back to personality profiles. Do they tell you any of that? I used to be a huge DISC believer. I still love DISC. I love it. Here's the deal though. It will not give me a good salesperson. It tells me a lot about that person. It tells me about what situations they're going to thrive in. It tells me how they're going to fit into my environment. It tells me if they're going to fit in with our culture. It tells me how they're going to communicate with their peers, but not if they're going to sell. Next was hunting with a lack of supervision. company that requires a salesperson to devote a lot of time prospecting without a lot of supervision, we're going to have to test that, right? Really what we're looking for is people with that don't have self-limiting record collection. All this means is this: every call is new. They don't let old calls beat them up, drag them down, and really wear them out so they stop making cold calls or stop prospecting. So it's just another piece of the puzzle, right? More research. Oh my gosh. In 2006, even more research showed that while a few strong salespeople failed, those who did failed because they could not work from a remote location. So 2006, we go, okay, we think we've got this dialed in. But some of the people that were predicted to be successful still failing. Why? They had one thing in common. They were all working remotely without direct supervision. So guess what we need to test for now? Can they work remotely if they're going to be in that role? So we start testing for that too, right? We also start testing, and really the way we test for that, and it bleeds into another subject, but I'm going to get into it now, is we're looking at what we call figured out factor. So some of this research with working remotely had to do with, did candidates just get it more quickly than others, right? If they're out on their own, do they get it? Can they figure it out and perform at their job? So that's what we're actually measuring for when we look for, will they be successful working in a remote location? Do they have the figured out factor? So we're measuring for that as well in assessments. Here's the deal. Finally, research conducted in late 2008 allowed OMG to identify perfect candidates. So this wasn't like benchmarking where a company could find candidates that had similar traits as their top performers, right? OMG was now able to identify with their assessments salespeople who met two things. They could, with their assessments, before hiring anyone, identify top performers who will meet 100% of quota or better, and who is in the top 26% of all salespeople. At the end of the day, is there really anything else that you want to know? Hey, if I hire this person, will they sell to quota or more, right? That's the key here. Will they and can they sell? Now, as we went through this, I went through it quick, but you probably realized there's a lot we're looking for. And this is really, really hard to bring out in an interview. You can do it. It's possible. It's time consuming. And you got to go through a lot of people to find the right candidates. So anyways, this is why I made this video. This is why I use OMG assessments, because OMG assessments measure everything we just talked about. We answer a few questions about your environment, that job, the role the person will be in, the job-specific duties, and then everything else we've learned about sales. We run candidates through this system, and then we know who's going to make it. Now, we can also do something else. We can take existing salespeople, run them through, and we can see exactly what they're built of and tailor training to help them out, right? So if they're with you right now, they're doing well, right? But can they do better? That's the question. So this is how we identify where exactly are they lacking. So what type of training? How do we address the root cause to get them to where they need to be? So guys, this is the science of salesperson selection. OMG assessments, those are the ones we use because they are the only assessment company out there that measures for this stuff. It makes sense, right? This is why they've got a 97% success record predicting great sales candidates. So I hope that gives you some, I hope if it does nothing more, it does this. It leaves you with the knowledge that salesperson selection is not a crapshoot. There's a science to it. It's not, well, we're going to hire a dozen people this year. All of them are going to wash out, but hopefully during that process, we don't break our backs hiring people and training them, and we end up profiting at the end of the year. That's not how it has to be. It doesn't have to be a revolving door. So my name's John Martinez. This is the modern science of salesperson selection. Guys, if you have any questions about this, just reach out to me, and I'll get back to you. You know what? Actually, I wasn't going to do this. I wasn't going to go any further with this presentation because I think that sums up everything we need to cover. But I think we're going to take an extra second here to go just a little deeper than I was planning to do on this video. So hang in there. I'm going to give you a couple more tools here, kind of as a bonus. On how you need to actually hire these people, the process to use that's a proven process. Okay, so let's run through there. Okay, rather than looking for similar traits, let's use an assessment or use that criteria we just went over and find the perfect candidate. And I'm not going to go into this, but you can actually also see by using these assessments how long someone's going to stay with you. We're actually looking on these particular assessments for a 5x ROI, however much it takes you to hire them. Time, resources, money-wise, will you at least get a 5x ROI, right? Here's the deal, though. This is the part I wasn't going to get into, but I'm going to get into it because I'm kind of on a roll here and I really get excited about this stuff. So, hey, if you just put these assessments in place and you don't have a good process around it, you don't change anything else about the way you hire, interview, and that type of thing, you're not going to get great results. It'll help you identify some better people, but it won't take you as far as you probably want to go. So real quick, here's the process you want to use when hiring salespeople. Identify the ideal candidate, search for them, assess that candidate, qualify that candidate, and interview that candidate. This is the proven way to hire salespeople. This is how you hire the right person. Let's go through them real quick. Number one, identify the ideal candidate. This is the most important step in the process, okay? A company must ask these questions. Why have salespeople failed in the past? What caused them to struggle? What is it about the way we must go to market that makes it so difficult to succeed? What's the kind of resistance that they'll meet? What kind of successes should they have already experienced if they're going to succeed here? Are we asking them to do anything different? Are our prices higher or lower? Does our product offering have less value? Do people need supervision and want to hear what we have? What kind of support, supervision, coaching, and accountability are they going to get from management? Guys, with the OMG assessments, there's a pre-assessment questionnaire that we fill out or the business owner fills out. Guess what they do? They help you identify this candidate because we're testing for all these things through the assessment. Search, right? So search comes to drafting a job ad. So let me give you some quick tips about drafting an ad. So really your ad, the whole point of the ad is to attract the right people, right? Because if you don't attract the right people, you're stuck in this stage, right? No one's going to pass the assessment. So when you write the ad, you want to write it as if you are calling by name the salesperson you want to attract, right? So it might sound like this. Hey, you must have prior success selling high-ticket, complex conceptual services to presidents of large companies in a highly competitive market. You must have prior income of at least $100K. That way you're going to get many more qualified prospects, right? Many more than if you went with an ad like, hey, successful, well-known company has an opening for a goal-oriented salesperson. We offer health and car and expenses and 401k and commission and blah, 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 right? Call the person by name you are looking for. Talk about them, what you're looking for, who they are, what they've experienced, not just a generic statement about the company. Then we assess, right? Whatever assessment you use, whether you do it yourself, whether you do it through interviews, whether you use any assessment out there, right? You're going to want to make sure that it has the following important components, right? It should say there, black and white, hire this person or don't hire this person. Not leave it to you to run through all the assessment scores and try to put that conclusion together yourself. It should have criteria that adjust to the complexity of the sales position, right? So an entry-level sales job is not the same as one that's going to pay $250,000. It's got to account for that. Your hiring criteria, it's got to incorporate the company's requirements, interviewing tips, right? Likely problems to expect when the salesperson is in the field. Conditions for hiring if there's any of those. A way to rank candidates in case you have to choose from several who are recommended. Compatibility with your ideal candidate. Your ramp-up times, right? And assessing in step 3 rather than in step 5 accomplishes 3 things, right? We have this in step 3. You don't fall in love with an undesirable candidate. You don't waste time interviewing undesirable candidates. And you know the candidate's capabilities before you actually meet with them for the first time. So this is the way you assess. Step 3. Step 4, qualify. Important piece of this. It consists of no more than 5 minutes on the phone with candidates, according to the assessment, who are already deemed hireable. In this step, you're going to just determine whether or not the candidate actually meets your requirements by asking them to demonstrate or explain that they meet the criteria. Remember in your ad, selling to successful presidents of blah, 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 blah. All you're going to do here is press them on it. Hey, how do I know you have experience? Tell me about a situation when. And you're just going to make sure they're being truthful and they actually have the experience that you know they need to have. We can get a little deeper there, but I'm going to move on because I wasn't even planning to do this, roll out this timeline. Step number 5, the interview. Now, at this point, since you already know their capabilities, you just focus on other things, eye contacts, their presentation, the way they carry themselves, the way they're put together, spontaneity, handshake, presence, charisma, sincerity, warmth, intelligence. How you feel about this candidate representing your company. So those are the 5 steps to really make sure you hire the right person, okay? Now, it's 40 years, it's way over 40 years. It's, 68 years or 60 years after Herb Greenberg began his attempt to find really what the science was of hiring a good salesperson. And now we have it. The data actually shows that 74% of all salespeople out there, people performing the job today, are average to weak. There's a very distinct combination of criteria that can be used to separate that 74% from the top 26%, okay? Now, we know this, OMG knows this, because they've tested more than 285,000 salespeople over the last 16 years. That's where this data comes from, right? And everything that we learned then, it's still true today. So, guys, this is absolutely the way you hire salespeople. It is not a guessing game. You no longer have to worry whether or not someone's going to work out for you. We just laid it out right here in probably 15 or 20 minutes. This is how you can avoid for the rest of your life from hiring the wrong salesperson. So, you can disregard this kind of at your own detriment, or start to adopt some of these things and get better results when hiring. All right, guys, my name is John Martinez. I'm signing out. I hope this was helpful. Bye-bye.